Do you ever have the sense that you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Like if you don't do everything just right, it's all going to fall apart. Like if you don't get the car fixed, if you don't answer that email, if you don't stay informed, something big is going to happen. Like your life's going to fall apart in a strange way. I think a lot of us experience this, especially in our modern day. And I think this is because there's so much potential in our modern age, right? There's so much we can do. There's so much we can know. And the sense of can makes it feel like we must. We must know. We must do these things. And this sense of must can create a great deal of anxiety. It becomes very overwhelming sometimes to think that if we don't do all these things and we don't do them just right, we could ruin our life, or it just won't be right? And there's all this pressure. Well, I got good news for you today. There is an answer to this, or there's a reason for it. And I think once we understand the reason for it, we can begin to let it go a little bit. Now, this does come at a cost. We're going to have to let something go. And I'm proposing today to you that this sense of Atlas, that we're carrying the world on our shoulders, is actually an act of hubris. Hubris is a very ancient word whose meaning has changed over the years, but it's typically considered an overarching sense of arrogance, that we don't need anything or anyone, that we're in charge. And I hope we can see as we go through this video that this is actually not how it is at all, and that can be like a big exhale, like let's relax a bit, because we're not as in control as we'd like to think. And I know a lot of us don't like to hear that. But again, I hope I can help you see that this is true. And not only is it true, it's okay. It's good. So before we get exploring what hubris means and how this works in your life, I'd like to ask you, if you enjoy these videos, to please click the subscribe button, hit that little bell notification, lets you know when I release new videos. Please like the video, leave comments are wonderful. I appreciate that in advance. So hubris, this sense that we don't need anyone or anything, that we are in control. It's a very common, pervasive thought, I think, in our modern day. And that's because we realize a lot of things. Like, in other words, we realize how powerful our thinking is, How useful positive thinking is. That, you'd find that a lot in like the law of attraction sort of concepts. We also realize that, wow, we can really change our environment. We can manipulate things around us. Science has figured this out to a great, vast degree. And so we look at these rather simple things, actually, and we think, okay, this means we're in control, because look at all these things we can do. But these things, I think we'll see, are actually quite small. They're wonderful, some of them anyways, but they are actually, in the big scheme of things, very minute. And we over-exaggerate their purpose and what it means we can actually do, and what we're actually responsible for, strangely enough. I'd like to start to broach this very complicated conversation in a way by using a metaphor. So if you use your imagination with me for a minute, let's imagine we're standing in a river. And we're like waist deep. It's a very big river. It's very deep, actually, but we're standing in about waist deep. And it's relatively calm right now. The current's at our back, so it's kind of gently pushing us forward. Now, what I'd like to propose is this is a metaphor for our life. And a lot of times in our life, we'll go about splashing in the river, making all kinds of commotion, And somehow, with all this commotion, we begin to believe that we are responsible for the motion of the river. And maybe even worse than that we are responsible for the river. But the truth is, it's a mighty river. And its current is carrying us along regardless of all our splashing about. Now, more than that even, if we look behind us, we can see a bit of the river, but we don't really know where the river comes from. And if we look ahead, we can't really know where the river's heading. Not fully, right? We can see a little bit both ways, but that's about it. This river is ancient, is enormous. You might even say is infinite. Its direction backward and forward. And here we stand splashing about thinking that we're doing something. Now, does this mean, you say, Adrian, are you trying to tell me that there's no purpose to anything I do and that I don't have free will? And I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is it's probably not what you think. It's probably not as much as you think either. Now, this is a rather humbling notion. And this is kind of how come we know it's true. There's a great deal of arrogance, of hubris in the thought that we have such a massive part to play in this enormous river. So what would be our role? What is it that we can do in this, amongst this vastness, right? Well, I would suggest that our greatest task, the greatest use of our time in the spot of the river that we find ourselves, is to learn the currents of the river and how to work with them. You know, splashing about in the river can be fun sometimes, by the way, right? It's not like it's all bad. This isn't a judgment call. It's just a reality check, right? All that splashing about probably isn't achieving nearly as much as we like to think. But if we understand that we're standing in this vast river, we can begin to work with its natural currents. And a couple of things are going to happen. One, we're going to become much more effective. Our ability to focus, our ability to work with that, right? We're going to be able to move much smoother. And our life is going to become much more peaceful. This sense of anxiety and being overwhelmed, right, with all this pressure that we feel like is bearing down on us all the time, gets relieved because the reality is we could just float and be fine. There's a lot of people in the world that do just that, by the way. Some of our greatest spiritual teachers have done that, right? They haven't been obsessed with careers or even families or anything like that, right? Their lives are super, super simple. And yet, life provides. And they have a massive impact on our lives, on the history of life, if you will, right? Some of these spiritual teachers. I love some of these examples too, like Jesus is a fantastic one. Buddha is a fantastic one, right? They had nothing. They wrote nothing. And yet thousands of years later, we're still talking about them. I think they found the current. So here's the reality to this, though, right? This is a challenging thing I'm laying before you, and it's counterintuitive and counterculture, if you will. Like, this is not the common message of our day and age. But I want to talk to you about the fact that it takes a great deal of trust to do this. To kind of find the current, lay back on our backs, if you will. And this doesn't mean that we do nothing, by the way. See, that's what makes it sound like I'm saying nothing. If you think about Buddha and Jesus, they were very active beings, right? That's part of why we do know about them. But I'm talking about the fact that we let life move us more than we are constantly trying to move life, right? We move with it. But it takes a great deal of trust. It's like when you teach a child how to swim, right? They start to learn that if they struggle, they'll sink. If they relax and lay back, they actually naturally float. It's that sort of intuition, right? But it's hard to have trust and faith without something to anchor it on. And I want to give you some examples of this, right? So I heard a great teacher talk about this once, and I loved it, so I'm going to share it with you. Like the kind of faith, that's a very loaded word again in this day and age, but the kind of faith we're talking about isn't one that we relinquish our reason, right? It isn't that we just start to think and believe in magical thinking. It's the kind of faith that says, okay, I'm not in New York City right now, but I can have faith that New York City is still there, right? I've been there before, so I have some sort of reference. And even if I hadn't, there's plenty of reasons to believe that it actually exists, right? And the fact that it still is there, even though I'm not there. Now, it takes a certain amount of faith to believe that, but it's not the kind of faith where I have to let go of all my reason. Matter of fact, my reasoning helps me realize this, right? So the kind of trust and faith that I am putting forth for you to consider is of this similar nature, right? One of the ways I love to talk about this, and I have many times, is that you are supported. Like the river will hold you if you don't struggle and splash about. It will. You can actually float, right? Your life is holding you at a very fundamental level. Here's an example. You have air to breathe. You didn't do anything for it. You don't have to do anything for it. It's provided for you. And without it, your body wouldn't be here. Another fantastic example is we have light, right? We need the sunlight. Without it, we wouldn't be. But there isn't a single thing that you or I could do to make the sun burn. It burns for us, so to speak. It provides its light freely. The list of things like this, the earth supports you, your every step, your every waking and sleeping moment rests in the arms of this Mother Earth. And there isn't a single thing that you can do or need to do for this to be true. And to think that you do is hubris, right? Now, you could be grateful. That's a wonderful thing to do. And that can actually enrich your experience of the whole entire thing. But it isn't required. I like to call this, this is everything I just said, right? Air, light, the earth, water. It's an act of love. How? Why? Because it's given to you freely. And you don't need to do a single thing. Unconditional. That's love. It asks nothing of you. Again, to be grateful, to be good stewards of these things are wonderful, but they still will come either way. Can you feel the support? Do you think maybe if you were to consider these sorts of things, if you were to pull your awareness into the present moment instead of worrying about something that just happened or that's going to happen, that maybe you could feel the current of your life? Another way I like to talk about this is that we like to take credit for the things that happen in our life a lot of times. I've done a lot of things. In this house you're looking at right now, I built this with my own 2 hands. But the truth is, how much of that did I do? In other words, all of the aptitudes that it took for me to be able to do that, they actually were given to me. I was kind of naturally a hard worker. I just kind of came into the world that way, right? I had my body was physically able enough, like healthy enough, thankfully. I didn't do anything for that. I have a certain level of intelligence where I could learn these skills. I didn't do anything for that. Now, certainly, I had to apply my focus to actually learn skills like this. But my ability to learn it, was beyond me. It was given to me. You have the same thing. You are a gift to the world, not because of anything you've done so much, but because of who you are. Beyond any little thing, any splashing about in the river. You're a miracle. And one of the greatest ways to appreciate that, to understand that, is to let go of this thought of this hubris, that you don't need anything else and that you have to do everything just right. Mistakes are not mistakes. I can't remember the quote, right? A mistake is just a part of the journey on the way to correctness, or right, to success, or whatever they say, something like that. It's all part of it, right? So, and then our success is not so much our success either, though. That's the funny thing. And this can sound like, well, God, I want it to be my success. I want to be able to take credit for it. And you can if you want to. But you should retain in some part of your mind that it's probably not as much your success as you might think. That the series of events that had to happen for you to have the success you had very little to play a part in. You see it? And that can deflate you in a way, but that's only if you're holding on to this concept of hubris. If you let it go, it's actually, again, it's like a big exhale. So you don't have to beat yourself up for the failures as much, but you can't pat yourself on the back so hard for the successes. And that's okay. There's a flow to that. There's a reality to that. One that will serve you. So the next time, that you're feeling overwhelmed by all the things you have to do, by all the things you want to do, take a moment to reflect on the river metaphor. And that actually you can do just that. See, by the way, that's the point, right? In other words, it's not to not do, it's to remember the river first. And then find that current and then go. And then move. Whatever it is. Start your business, right? Teach your child something new because you feel like they need to know, right? Take care of the bill. Whatever that is, right? But remember, you're standing in this vast ocean, river, and it's supporting you. You're breathing the air that's given to you freely. And move in that vein. And I think you'll find that your life becomes a little more peaceful. And funny enough, almost certainly a little more productive. It's strange that way. This sense of hubris, as I said, is pervasive in our society these days. And it pains me to see it sometimes because there's a great price to pay. A tremendous amount of suffering comes from this belief that we don't need anything, or anyone else, and that we are in control. I encourage you to pay closer attention, to go a little bit deeper, and to see that there's a big story here, a vast motion, of which we are a very tiny part. And it's an honor to play any part. But it's important to remember that we're just such a small little thing in this vastness. And the more we humble ourselves that way, the more we'll feel the underlying joy and peace and freedom, strangely enough, that comes with the learning how to work with the current of life, with the flow of life. I encourage you to do just that. You know, it's like anything else, it's a skill. So the more you do it, the better you'll get. As always, I thank you for your time. It's precious.